You got the high-paying job, the luxury apartment, the nice car, and everyone told you that was freedom. It wasn't. Instead, it felt like pressure. Because once your life starts looking successful, walking away feels irresponsible and reckless. I spent 13 years building that life. But the most dangerous part was this: nothing looked wrong. Yet deep inside, I wanted to burn it all down to ashes. But what if everything you thought you needed is actually holding you back? Not just the place, but the life you built around it. Every quarter came with a target, and I knew how to play that game. The promotions, the commissions, the pressure to keep leveling up. I could walk into a room, read the politics, understand the client, and close the deal. People called that success. And to be honest, I absolutely agreed with them, loudly. I love the pace, the competition, and the clarity. You perform and you get rewarded. Simple, straightforward, addictive. I was basically fluent in a second language, and corporate bullshit was my specialty. Closing deals gave me financial security, and promotions gave me titles to build my identity around. During that stretch, I went from making $33,500 a year to making that in a month. A completely insane upgrade from a previous life. In this alternate timeline, I went from living in a rough neighborhood to a $4,000 a month high-rise. And the car went from utility to a status symbol. It became my favorite toy. For the first time, money felt like safety. Progress was easy to point to. Promotion, raise, upgrade, repeat. I was crushing it, or whatever that means. And when you live inside that cycle long enough, it starts to feel less like a choice and more like the natural order of your life. That's part of what makes it dangerous. Nothing about it felt reckless. It felt responsible. It felt like winning. And honestly, it felt fucking amazing until it didn't. That's why it takes so long to question. But somewhere in there, what started as ambition slowly turned into maintenance. I wasn't building a career anymore. I was protecting a lifestyle. And that shift is easy to miss because from the outside, everything still looks right. The resume gets sexier and more polished. The income grows, and the lifestyle finally starts matching the version of success you always imagined. Nothing appears broken. And that's exactly the problem, because when everything looks fine, nobody questions it, including you. But privately, a low-grade tension starts settling in. Not dramatic, but consistent enough to make every new milestone land a little flatter than the one before. Maybe you have felt that. When the next step still looks impressive but no longer feels alive. Promotion, upgrade, repeat. Then the whole structure came to a complete stop. I lost the job. And with it, I lost the machine that had been organizing my life for years. No meetings, no travel, no targets to hit, just pure, raw, unfiltered, and deafening silence. At first, my response was automatic. Update the resume, get back in the market. That was the obvious and responsible move. But it was also revealing, because even after the structure collapsed, my first instinct was still to rebuild the same structure. That's when I started realizing how deep the conditioning went. The urgency was there, the fear was there, and the financial pressure was absolutely there. The conviction, however, was not. And that's a rough place to stand, because from the outside, it still looks like a simple career decision. But privately, I was facing a more existential question. Do I actually want to rebuild this life again? That question might sound simple from the outside. Living inside it feels different. Because when your identity has been attached to a path for more than a decade, stepping away from that path doesn't feel like a pivot. I call it a voluntary exile from society. It feels like erasing a version of yourself that other people knew, and maybe the only version you respected. That's how the downward spiral begins, with a slow tightening. You start doing the math more often than you want to admit. How long will the savings last? How much runway do I really have? And how expensive is this life I'm no longer sure I want? That's the part that hit me the most, because I had a great severance. On paper, that should have created options. But at the time, I had also just moved to a new city. I had just gotten a new car. And breaking those contracts made freedom more expensive than I wanted to admit. That was a rough realization. I had spent years building a life that looked successful, only to look around and see how much that life cost me to leave. That's what got me thinking. Once your lifestyle starts dictating your choices, you're not fully choosing anymore. At that point, you're just managing obligations. Then the nights get eerily quiet, and I couldn't stop ruminating. Maybe you've been here before. Not because your life imploded, hopefully, but because it worked. Success gives you social proof, financial incentives, and a respectable excuse to keep going, even after the path stops feeling true. The job supports the lifestyle. The lifestyle justifies the job. And before long, your calendar, your expenses, and your identity are all one. That's when the system starts to own you. Failure, on the other hand, forces reflection, even if you don't want to. That realization changes the question. You stop asking what the most responsible move should be, and instead, you start asking a deeper question. What kind of life can I still respect myself for living? In these moments, walking away from the system sure sounds bold from the outside, but from the inside, it feels like a mix of stupidity, delusion, and confusion, with just a sprinkle of courage and clarity. Because the cost shows up immediately. You lose the title, the structure, and the version of yourself people once knew. And that part matters more than most people want to admit. Family tries to support you, but they start asking you to reconsider. Friends also try to be supportive, but not everybody knows what to do with a decision they would never make themselves. The truth is, no one will understand, not because they don't love you, but because your decision unsettles their own idea of what a responsible life is supposed to look like. And in those moments, your own internal doubt gets louder, the kind that asks whether conviction is courage, or just a nicer way of describing stupidity or risk. That's where a lot of men fold. Because walking away from one identity before the next one has earned enough proof to feel stable becomes exhausting. But that's the cost. Because at a certain point, staying starts to cost more than leaving. And in the end, every reinvention comes down to stepping into uncertainty. Not a perfect strategy, just one simple decision to keep going. In the end, the life I spent years building fit into 2 suitcases. Clothes, shoes, camera gear, and a laptop. That was it. For a long time, I treated success like accumulation. Now it looks different. Less weight, less certainty, and more room. What I'm documenting is reinvention. This is the part most people hide because it looks unfinished while you're still living through it. Along the way, I'll explore new places, I'll meet new people, I'll discover new versions of myself. But I'm also sure somewhere along that process, I'll probably lose myself more times than I would like. And in those moments, you have to remind yourself, this is part of the process. Reinvention sounds exciting when you describe it from a distance, but when you experience it, it feels like a mix of grief and clarity. Some days feel clear, other days feel uncomfortably dark. But that instability does not always mean you made the wrong decision. Sometimes it just means you finally stopped numbing yourself with certainty. And maybe you're standing at a similar crossroads. Maybe the life you built still looks impressive on paper, but privately it has started to feel misaligned for a while now. Because sometimes the real trap is not failure, it is success. And maybe it's only after we lose everything that we're finally free to build something new.